about that.
That's okay. Yeah, I know several of you have my locomotive books, and a couple of you at least have copies of my new watermill book, but this is what it looks like. The title is Historic Watermills of North America. It's published by the University of Alabama Press. It's a 12 by 10 format, and I haven't actually counted the pages, but the numbered pages I think are 264. And it is available, you know, through most booksellers. I've been pretty happy with it. The quality of the print and the production to me is just absolutely outstanding. It's the best of the books I have done as far as the package is concerned. And one comment I generally make at this point when I'm talking about one of my books is the emotional aspect. After working on something like this for about 45 years, really all my adult life, to finally see some part of it packaged like this in a book. The first time you open the book, it's just almost overwhelming. And this is really my third fairly widely distributed commercial book. So I've experienced that several times now. Other general comment I'd like to make is, on one level, this is a really nice coffee table book. Like I said, the print quality is great. It's organized so you don't have to read the whole thing. You can just pick it up, or guests in your home can pick it up. On another level, it makes a really nice travel guide. And I know some people have already used this to actually go out and visit a watermill. And we tried, when we made the selections for the watermills to include, to pick primarily watermills that people could find. Some are easier to find than others because a lot of them are off the beaten path. But everything in here is where you could get to it and you could find it and you could experience it for yourself if you want to. But the third level that I would like to mention relative to this book is, and I've been doing this for a long time, this is the definitive collection on watermills in North America at this point. There is nothing else like this out there. It's not like just another locomotive book where the bookshelves and Amazon is full of them. It's very unique. I don't expect anything else like this to come along for a generation unless I get really lucky and it sells 100,000 copies and somebody else wants to maybe do one of their own. But those are just a few general comments on the book. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now. And let's see if I can open up this PowerPoint presentation. And okay, I hope you can all see this now. But this is actually the cover of the book. And this is the Amos Woodward Machine Shop in Illinois. Last time I did this presentation, the comment I got was that the participants wanted to know the names of at least some of the watermills and maybe where they are. But this one is in Illinois, and it's a water-powered machine shop. This image is one of about a half dozen that I suggested to the university that they consider for the cover. And I actually thought they might pick something that had a red mill on it or a red water wheel or something like that. But they went with this one, and I like it fine. This is a watermill I visited literally at the crack of dawn. I was out there before daylight driving, looking for it. I found an opening along the waterfront, and I just set my tripod up and started taking photographs until the sun got up. And then later, back home, I picked the image that I liked best. So this is a reality right now of what it's been like having a book released during a pandemic. Vista Engineering is the corporate sponsor for this book. They made a fairly significant financial contribution to the project. They're a materials and metals engineering firm, and their home office is in Homewood, Alabama. I've known the president and the CEO for many years. We're pretty good friends. So it was a big favor for me, but in a lot of ways it relates to their work also. And they were planning to host a a fairly large reception at the holidays and have me sign copies for people that came in. But of course, that didn't happen. So I'm sitting in one of their conference rooms, solo signing 50 books the day I did this. So it's not really what I had in mind, but you know, it's what we can do at this time. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for a long time, and I try to stay focused on what I'm doing and the way I'm approaching it. And one of my running themes through the project has been that mills are magical, and they are to me, and they are to some other people also. People are familiar with them. And I know some of you who are listening today have been to watermills, have seen watermills, been inside. Some of you may have even had grain ground or been there when grain was being ground or seen wood being sawed in a watermill. There are others of you, probably more of you, who have seen watermills in passing, you know, driven by them, or you've seen them in movies and things like that. So you have a little bit of a perspective on what they are. But there are a lot of people out there who have never seen a watermill. Or if they've seen it, it just didn't register with them that it was anything other than just an old barn or an old building that just happened to be sitting by a creek or by a mill pond or something like that. And I've discovered over the years that that's a reality for a lot of people, because when I'm out in a rural area looking for a watermill, you know, nowadays we have all this electronics. We didn't when I started doing this, but now, you know, we have GPS, we have smartphones, we can print out Google directions. That'll get you close to a lot of these watermills, but quite often it won't actually take you to the parking area or the front door, because a lot of these mills don't have a mailing address. So you get close and you look around, you don't see it, then you start asking. Anyone that you happen to see, you may go into a little store, it may be somebody cutting their lawn or whatever, but more often than not, they don't know where the watermill is either. And they may have lived in this area all their lives. And I think it's because it just has never registered with them that that was a watermill, because it literally may be almost in view of where we're talking, or certainly not more than a mile or so away. So I've just learned to kind of deal with that and be courteous and just go on if they don't know what it is. Yeah, and on another level, particularly with younger folks, I like to ask if they know what a watermill is. And quite often the response I get is, does it make water? You know, so I'm trying to think of, well, what are they envisioning here? And I think they see it more like a Brita water filter or something that grinds coffee or something in the kitchen. Certainly not one of these beautiful old romantic structures that, you know, you see that you're going to see in this presentation today. So yes, watermills are magical. You know, they've been the subject of painters and engravers and artists and poets and photographers now for many centuries. I'm not the first, but, you know, I was charmed by them pretty early on, and it stuck with me, and it's been, you know, a big part of my life. This is the picture that's actually on the bio page in my new book. These water wheels are attached to a mill that's more than 1,000 years old, if you can believe that. Marford Mill, it was listed in the Norman Doomsday Book in 1086. I'm sure the water wheels have been reworked a number of times, but these are the water wheels. And I'm actually going to come back and talk about those a little bit and, you know, a little later in the presentation. But, you know, I've been fascinated with this for a long time. And this map shows you some of the watermill sites that I have visited over the years. I think I've been to about 250 watermills. I don't think anyone else has probably ever seen that many watermills. Now, you know, I'm a locomotive guy too, railroad guy. So a lot of these visits and trips are connected with trying to see historic locomotives and railroading sites and things like that. So I do both together whenever I can, but this gives you a little feel kind of for, you know, for where I've been, at least some of the sites. The numbers represent watermills that are in my new book. The dots are for other watermills that I have visited that, you know, at some point might be in a future publication of some sort. But it's been quite a life experience for me. So I thought what I would do first with that little introduction is just show you a few photos of watermills and make a few general comments about them so we kind of get on the same page in terms of what watermills are like and what they're all about, why they're there, and so forth. I certainly can't show you all the images from the book. We'll just see a small percentage of them today. And I will add this. I adapted this presentation for what I perceived as the audience today. This is a historic railway and locomotive kind of group. So it's a little different than the presentation I might do, say, if it was a photography club or a book club or a civic group or a church group or a senior group. I'd probably switch out a few slides. You're going to see a few more pictures today of milling equipment and the insides of mills and things like that than I typically do. So this is the Guildhall Grist Mill. It's up in northern Vermont, right on the New Hampshire line and about 10 miles from the Canadian border, right on the Connecticut River. Beautiful, beautiful area. I'd love to get to go back there if I can, at some point. So we look at a structure like this today, and honestly, it looks pretty simple, almost primitive in a lot of ways. But what you have to keep in mind is in the medieval period, during the early years of the Industrial Revolution, in colonial and frontier America, this was absolutely revolutionary. It changed the way of life. It was a quantum leap from anything people had known before. Before these machines, pretty much everything was done either with animal power or men and women using their own muscles. But all of a sudden now we had this machine that transformed the way of life pretty much, around the world. And I mentioned a couple of slides back, I asked people if they know what a watermill is. So I sort of have a little definition that I'm going to share with you now, and it'll kind of put this in perspective a little better. Watermill, it harnesses the power of moving water as the water flows in a stream and as it falls from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. So the linear movement of the water is transferred into rotational energy to operate machinery in a mill. So you see that red water wheel on the mill in the background. That thing weighs several thousand pounds. You get it rotating at 10, 12, 20 revolutions per minute, and it produces just an absolutely incredible amount of energy for doing work, unlike anything that anyone had seen before. The other thing you might have noticed on the map I showed you is there's a concentration of those dots and numbers in the eastern part of the United States and up into Atlantic Canada. There's several reasons for that. One is there's a lot of waterfall in the eastern North American region, and there's also the Appalachian Mountains and the foothills and the transition to the coastal plain. And there's a region through there that's kind of known as the fall line. And with those hills and mountains and all the waterfall, there are a lot of rapidly moving streams. There are a lot of waterfalls. They're just natural sites for developing watermills. When the Europeans arrived, they had watermills, but they'd never seen anything like the Eastern Appalachians in terms of good siting opportunities for watermills. So I first visited this watermill. This is the Dexter Grist Mill in Massachusetts. I first visited in 1982, and I can remember it well. We spent the night at a Howard Johnson's nearby. This is out near in the Cape Cod area, and the place was an absolute dump. I was there with my wife, her brother, and his girlfriend, and it was one of those places where the carpet was so sticky you didn't want to take your shoes off. So we were up and out the next day before daylight looking for this watermill, and we found it after a little driving around, and it was totally overgrown. Mostly with like weeping willow trees and things like that. So, you know, I was the one that wanted to go there. So I had to feel the wrath of everybody else. Why are we wasting our time here? You know, so I took a few pictures, not much that I could do anything with. I did try when I got home, but not much. So I was back there again about 5 years ago, and it's all cleaned up. It's been restored. It's operational now. It's actually part of a park. So it was quite a beautiful area. The mill itself looked very similar. It's a little freshened up and everything, but it's just amazing the transition over a few decades. And this mill actually dates to the 1600s. So it's been there in North American and European, you know, colonial time scale for quite a while. So this is Falls Mill in Belvedere, Tennessee. Some of you may have even been there. It's a beautiful site. It's open most days of the week. It's a museum, and you know you can go through. You can actually stay there. Their bed and breakfasts and so forth. But the comment I want to make on this slide is most water mills are designed for grinding grain. You know, corn, wheat, oats, buckwheat, rye, barley, and so forth. But in the United States, there are about 40 different applications for water mills. They can also be used for sawing wood. That's the second most common application. They can be used to run textile mills. That's probably the most lucrative financial and economic application. They blew air into furnaces, old ironworks. They drove pounding hammers, pumped water out of mines, pulverized ore, pressed fruit, just all sorts of things that they could be applied to do. And this is a textile mill. It's a cotton mill, okay? You know, for processing cotton cloth. It's a massive structure. It's 4 stories tall. There's equipment on all 4 floors. That water wheel is 32 feet in diameter to drive all that equipment through the mill. So it was not a grist mill. Actually, it was a grist mill just a few hundred yards upstream from here. The ruins are still there today. And they do use this mill as a grist mill now, but it's still opened as a textile museum. So you can go through and you can see the spinners and the looms and everything that was used back in the day, you know, for processing cotton cloth. Now, this mill is in Kentucky. This is the Wolf Pen Branch Mill. And back when I first started photographing water mills, I tried it with color film, color slides and color negatives. I could never get what I wanted. I was never satisfied with the results. So I developed this little process, and it's not new to me. It's new to me. It's not new in general, technologically at least, but I photographed the mills in black and white. I made enlarged prints, and then I oil painted the prints. And that's what I did here. This is actually a black and white photograph that's been painted with oil. And for a number of years, this was my most popular watermill image. I think it was my most popular image, period, because I've actually painted about 20 of these prints that people, you know, wanted to hang in their homes. This mill is near Louisville, Kentucky, and most of the corn meal that was ground here went to the Louisville and Nashville Railroad to be served in the dining cars on their passenger trains. There was connection between the people that owned the estate where this mill was located and some of the directors and higher ups at L&N Railroad, and they made that connection, and it, you know, it worked that way for a long time. So I did this picture so long ago that water wheel, that's a 26-foot diameter water wheel, that wheel actually rotted off, and they restored it and put a new wheel back on there since I was there. I haven't been back since then. And this thing is stacked stone without mortar. So it's really an interesting structure, just a beautiful scene as far, you know, as far as I'm concerned too. So we've been looking at these pictures, and one of the thoughts you may have is, why are they all so different? You know, there's no standardization in the way these things were built, but, you know, the country was pretty isolated at the time they were being built. So each one is unique, and they're really a function of what the landscape was like there, what available building materials they had, what it was going to be used for, maybe how large it needed to be, and then just sort of the creative and design aspects of what the millwrights and the millers thought they wanted in their mill. So as a result, they're all unique, they're all individual, and that's the reason it makes such an interesting book, is you turn from one page to another to see how different they look, and yet, you know, a lot of them are pretty much performing the same kind of functions. So photographically speaking, you have that variety in the way the mills look, but you also have variety based on the conditions when you take the photograph. Is it overcast? Is, in this case, it's foggy when I was here. Is it bright sunshine? Is it fall of the year? Is it spring? Is it winter? Because they're going to look different any time of year you might be there, and any set of conditions you might encounter. I tend to like to visit them either very early in the morning or very late in the afternoon, but you can count on a little more consistently good light when you're doing that. But Dory and I, and Dory's on this Zoom meeting today, we stayed nearby. This is in North Carolina. This is the High Hampton Inn, and it's now used as a honeymoon cottage. We stayed at a Hampton Inn nearby. Interesting, the name is the same. It rained heavily the night before. We're up early, and it was so foggy you could hardly see the road. So we finally got here, found a place to park, got out of the car. It's still so foggy you can barely see to walk. We're looking for it. We don't never been here before. We don't know where it is, and there are trails, going different ways. But we finally got here, and the fog, began to lift, and we started taking pictures. And one of the things that I remember well about this one is, to get this picture, I actually had to kind of wade out in a cattail area. Water's a little more than ankle deep, and I ruined my shoes doing it. It was cold, so I wasn't quite as concerned with the risk of snakes, but I'm still pretty careful about things like that when I get out in water like that. But it allowed me to get a little better perspective, for photographing the mill. This is a very different kind of a mill that is in a very remote area. It's one I asked several times trying to find, because there's no way electronic gadgets were going to get here. In fact, GPS took me about 20 miles from here. This is a Dillinger grist mill, or just Dillinger Mill, and there was a Dillinger Road about 20 miles from here, and that's where my phone and my GPS tried to take me. So I was a little frustrated there. I had to do a lot of backtracking, the lights changing and everything. But I got back here. I asked several people before I was able to meet up with a lady that knew where it was. And it's down a one-lane road. And one thing I've learned in visiting watermills is there are still a lot of one-lane roads in the United States. You can get out into California, you can get into West Virginia, North Carolina, anywhere in the mountainous areas, and you can drive for hours on nothing but one-lane roads. And it's kind of an eerie feeling if you're out there by yourself, especially if it's getting late in the evening, or you're going to be able to find your way out of there. But I finally found it. I drove up, saw the mill, kind of assessed it. I parked the car. When I'm doing this kind of photography, I make sure I leave the car on public property, somewhere I can't get parked in. You learn these lessons the hard way when you're younger as a photographer, because somebody who may not want you photographing this thing, they'll pull up and block you in if they have that option. So I parked the car, I turned it off, rolled the windows down. I listened for a minute just to see if I hear anything, and I'm looking around. If I don't, then I kind of open the door and stand up and look around a little more. I'm particularly wary of things like, unfriendly landowners, pit bulls, things like that might be in the area. So if it's still quiet, then I start setting up my tripod, which could be used as a weapon if you needed to some extent also. Then I mount the camera. At that point, I'm kind of ready to step away from the car. And as soon as I get where I can get a view of the mill, I start taking pictures, because you never know when that may be all you get. But I worked my way till I got down to the creek bank to do this picture. And that's the perspective here with the water wheel. So this picture is in the book, but that building in the background is an old double-walled apple barn with sawdust between the walls. So if you look at the intro in the book, you'll see a picture from that angle with the apple barn looking back toward the mill. And actually, I did see two pretty sizable snakes when I walked down that way, but you know, I gave them a wide berth and stayed away from them and everything. This is a very different kind of a mill. This is a popular tourist destination mill. It's in Missouri. It's Dillard Mill. So you got an asphalt parking lot, tour buses come up, everything. So we just parked, we got out with all the other tourists, made our way down to the waterfront. I found a spot where I had this sort of zigged foreground along the water's edge, set up my tripod, and I waited for that fly fisherman, because he was moving around, to get where he had a background that would make him kind of pop out. And you see that barn with the hay bales in the background, and the light was pretty good. So I did a picture that was similar to what other people would probably do here also. I thought I'm gonna just show you about 3 or 4 pictures of other kinds of water mills for variety. This is the old Adderholt Mill over near Jacksonville State. So if you want to see a beautiful water mill in Alabama, that's probably the prettiest one in the state, Adderholt Mill. This is Spring Mill in Indiana. It is a massive grist mill and sawmill complex. It's in a state park. And I included this page because people ask me, well, how do you know about water mills? How do you find them, especially before the internet? Well, this is how I did it for years. Any source I could get my hands on, but the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills published and still publishes lists of water mills by state and by county. And back in the day, you could order these lists, and they were about $1, $2 per state, mostly to cover postage and the photocopying they had to do for you. And they would send you lists. And this is the list for Indiana. And if I knew I was going to get to go somewhere, like Indiana, for example, I would study the list. And I would go through, and you see I've marked, this is page 3 from the Indiana list. I would mark mills that looked like they were good possibilities, okay? They said something like, you know, large overshot water wheel, huge overshot water wheel. And the mill we just saw on the previous page is actually, let's see where it is on here. It's called Hamner Mill because it's in Lawrence County. It's the huge overshot wheel. It's now known as Spring Mill, but at the time I did this, it was called Hamner Mill. And this is all you get. These are the directions to find it. And, you know, it says it's where the park's located, and you show up and, you know, you try to drive to it with these very limited instructions. You've never seen a picture of it. You don't know if it's going to be photogenic or if there's even anything there. I think the Indiana list is about 5 pages, and probably I guarantee you not more than 20% of those mills listed, probably not more than a couple on this page are even there, because numerous times I've driven out and the mills no longer exist, or they're just a few ruins along the creek bank. So you never really know. You know, you're really excited when you show up at one and there's something there, you know, worth seeing and worth photographing. This is the upper mill at Phillipsburg Manor. This is in Sleepy Hollow, New York. Very, very beautiful area. And this mill is in Birmingham. This is over in, I don't know if it's Mountain Brook or Vestavia. It's on Seagard Hollow Road. It was built in about 1900. It's known as the Swan Mill House. The thing about this mill, and it's not in my book, it was restored in 2015, and to me, visually, they ruined it. They made it look like a modern suburban home to me. It's actually older than the Robert Jemison Mill, you know, the old Mountain Brook Mill. And it has a wooden water wheel, and it's a beautiful site, but they just updated it a little too much, you know, for my taste when they redid it. This is the most famous and popular water mill in the United States, one of the most famous in the world. This is Mabry Mill on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Okay. If you ever drive the Blue Ridge Parkway, or if you have, you probably visited here. There's a restaurant here. You know, it's operated by the Park Service. So there's a restaurant, a big gift shop. You can actually buy things that say Mabry Mill on them, like T-shirts and coasters. That's rare for water mills. With locomotives and railroads, you can find all kinds of little memorabilia and clothing items. They're scarce for water mills, but you can find that sort of thing here at Mabry Mill. This was a sawmill, and then they added a grist mill a little later. And because it's in a national park kind of a setting, everything is authentic. It's a really nice visit. I've been there probably 4 or 5 times over the years, and I'd love to get to go again. So with that said, I mentioned that was a sawmill, and then the grist mill was kind of added in the front. I want to just say a little bit about the history of water mills to kind of put that aspect of this in perspective a little better, and how long these have been around and how we got where we are today with water mills. So the first historical records that are of using water power date to Egypt in about the 3rd century BC. Now, historians generally believe that the Chinese and probably some of the Middle Eastern early civilizations were using water power before that. You know, maybe the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Hittites, some of those groups, but they don't have enough conclusive evidence to document that at this point. The Greeks and Romans then adapted water power. They didn't do it as quickly as they might have, because in reality, they had so much slave labor, they didn't need the machinery as much as, you know, some other cultures and, you know, areas might have. But they did adapt it. And the first written description of a water mill with a vertical water wheel to power horizontal millstones, which is what most grist mills are today and were 100 years ago and 200 years ago, dates to about 25 BC. So they were using water mills by about that period, probably somewhat a little earlier than that. And this is a drawing or illustration that I've seen over the years that I just find absolutely fascinating, how the Romans stacked these water mills on an embankment, one below another, to provide flour from this mill in France to go back to Rome. Because, you know, the emperors knew the way to keep their people happy was keep them fed. So they used these water mills to provide flour and to send it back. And there were several other installations kind of like this. There's 16 water mills here in this complex. Of course, it was built with slave labor. And there was one similar to this in Spain and a few others also. The closest thing I have to a photograph of something like that, a stacked mill, is this one I photographed in Italy. This is at Sorrento. And this mill is built in a volcanic fissure. And you see there's a waterfall on the left side. So they were able to power a grist mill and a sawmill with separate water wheels here, you know, way back in the day. And of course, it's in ruins now, and it looks like it operated for quite some time, because I suspect that stack on the right side is probably for a steam engine. It could have been for a furnace or for something like that. But most of the time when you see the early water mills and there's a chimney there, it was later powered, you know, by a steam engine. But this lets you see visually kind of what that stacked water mill, you know, concept might have looked like. So as the Romans conquered Western Europe, they took their technology and their engineering with them everywhere they went, and that included water mills. So today there are ruins like this, you know, kind of all across Europe of early Roman water mills. And the Roman ruins of water mills actually survived longer than some of the later water mills, because the Romans tended to use more stone, do more earth moving and things like that, that the archaeologists can go back and fine now than some of the later mills that were built with more local materials, like mostly wood. And in many cases, in England, for example, a water mill would last about 200 years. And when it was just absolutely worn out, they would just tear it down and build another one right on top of it. So it's hard now for archaeologists to find much record of where those water mills were, because there's just not much there that you can separate out from things that, you know, were done later. Then a little bit later, by the medieval period, the monks in the monasteries really did a lot to advance water mill technology. So this is Fountains Abbey, and this is a water mill. And they set their water mills up to do multiple tasks. Whatever they needed at the monastery, they used water power to do it, not just grind corn, but to saw their wood, you know, prepare their fabrics and things like that. And it was what was been described as an early factory model. So there were sequence of things that were being done in a, you know, in a big mill like this. So you go down to the end of this mill race, and you'll see there's a water wheel down there, and it was connected with wooden linkage to power equipment, you know, throughout this early mill. Now, wool textile processing was, of course, done in the early days all by hand. And it was a very laborious process. So by about the 1300s, this mill was built. This is in the Cotswolds in the UK. This mill was built for fulling wool. Now, fulling wool is the process where you clean it, you thicken it, and you pack it down so you have something a little bit better to work with. And before fulling mills, this was done by slaves. And the way they did it was they took these big vats. And the best illustration I have for that, you've probably seen how they stomp grapes in a vat. You may have seen Lucille Ball stumping grapes in one of their episodes. Well, you take a big vat like that, and you put wool in it, and then you fill it about knee deep with urine, and then you put the slaves in there, and they stomp and walk on the wool to press it, to clean it, and to compact it and so forth. Well, when these kind of fulling mills came along, they applied the water wheel to pounding hammers. So instead of walking on the wool, they used hammers to pound the wool. And they called that a walk mill. W-A-K is what it was the term for it, because it was like walking on the wool, but these pounding hammers were doing it. And from what I understand, the sound of this was just absolutely deafening. And in England, you know, which emerged quickly to the forefront in textile production, there might be 15 mills like this up and down a stream where the water was well suited to mill siding. And through that whole area, the sound would just be a roar of those pounding hammers pounding that wool.
Ken?
Yes.
Be sure and check your chat. Somebody had a question.
Okay. I'm not sure I can do that without coming out of sharing.
Just read the question.
You want to read it to me?
Okay, we can do that at the end. I've got the question
Okay.
written down.
Okay. So I'll keep rolling along then for now. This is part of the complex there where the peasants lived that worked in these fulling mills. And it's quite ironic that now this is some of the most valuable property in the UK. And at one point, the peasants were just en masse living here in very primitive conditions. But this particular scene, this is the Arlington Mill complex. This particular structure has appeared in several movies, you know, in recent years because it's such a picturesque scene. And I'll make one comment about this mill. This is the old mill at Lower Slaughter, and it's said to be one of the best preserved medieval mills. These medieval grist mills were all part of the feudal estates. So they were owned and operated by the lord of the manor. So the peasants were required to bring their grain to the lord's mill to have it ground. And of course, then the Lord and the estate kept a large percentage for themselves, which was very resented by the peasants. And it led to revolts and in a few cases, actually wars that came out of this process. This particular mill was part of the feudal system until about 1800 before it was finally freed up. And oh yeah, there's a chimney there by this mill just to the right of the water wheel. And that was for a steam engine that was added later on to supplement what was being done, actually probably replace what the water mill had been doing. This is a French mill, and unlike most other mills that I have encountered, this is an ornate mill. And of course, leave it to the French to do that. This was built at the same time and designed by some of the same designers that built Versailles. So it has that elegant kind of quality about it that most mills don't have, because most mills are purely functional. The fact that we today appreciate them for their beauty and their charm, it's just a function of, you know, what they are. That was not part of the design when they were being built. So moving on to colonial America now, these are some early mills in the United States. Now, when I visit water mills that are open and there's a miller there or there's a miller operating the mill, and they find out, you know, when I'm visiting with them, and I've been to a lot of water mills, the first thing they ask is their mill the oldest one in the country? Because a lot of them think it is. They know all about milling, which I don't, but they haven't visited other mills, and generally they haven't read about the technology or the history or anything like that. So they're always disappointed when I pull out, you know, like a binder or something and show them mills that were built in the 1600s, because theirs was probably built after the Civil War, because that's when most of the remaining grist mills were built up. A lot of them were destroyed in the Civil War, and there was a big technological and building period, you know, just after the Civil War for this sort of thing. So even in the North, a lot of the early mills got torn down, and, you know, a little bit more modern, a little bit larger mills were built on their sites. So these are some of the really early mills that were kind of along the Atlantic coast. If you get back more on the frontier, this is more what the early mills kind of looked like. They were generally small. They served maybe one or just a few families or a large family group. Everything, including the millstones, were local. They were acquired right there on the site. The wood, the stones, anything they were using was locally produced. I mentioned early on that one of my running themes was mills are magical. The other one is that I've kind of worked with over the years. It's the power of water. So this is the old red mill near Albertville, Alabama, but this picture is not about the mill. I've been here a number of times. This mill is about this water, the tremendous power and energy that you can see here in this literally churning water. Oh, it is just frightening, because I'm right there on a ledge taking this picture, knowing a number of people have drowned here over the years. I'm staying back far enough to avoid any of that. But just look at the energy that's being discharged as this water moves down the stream. This is Reichard's Mill at Monroeville, Alabama. Anytime you see swirling water like this, you do not want to go there, because it's lapping at my feet where I'm standing on the bank. This is McConnell's Mill in Pennsylvania. The sign I passed just as I was walking down to this stream bank said 3 people have already drowned here this year, because these are class 4 rapids right here in front of this mill. I don't know how they even operated or built it, because I've been here a couple of times and the water is always just literally raging. It just seems like more than you would need for operating a mill. This is at Wilmington, Delaware. Of course, Wilmington's been in the news lately a lot with President Biden, but this is part of the old DuPont black powder mill works. And this is the Brandywine River, and you can see the power and the energy that's flowing here. And this, by the way, this is another oil painted photograph. I've only been here on this side of the river one time because it's very hard to get here. I actually tried to cross it upstream at one point years ago, and it was the leeches that stopped me from doing it because they went for me immediately as soon as I put a foot in the water. But I got here one time, my daughter was with me, and photographed back to the mill. And you see the wheel between the two mills. These are the Etherian mills, and they're part of the black powder process. And there's actually a canal in the trees just behind here. There's a dam just upstream, and the water's diverted through that canal, and then it flows back over this water wheel and back into the river. Interesting thing here is these are what they call blowout structures. These date to like about the time of the War of 1812. But these roofs and the front panels were designed to blow out. So if they had an explosion in the mill, it would blow out toward the river and not back toward their canal and other things that they had going on there. So one of them actually has its roof intact. The other one appears to have been blown out. Of course, in terms of power of water, the Mississippi is the ultimate. And St. Anthony's Falls at Minneapolis is just, if you haven't been there and stepped up and seen that water roaring through the river there, it's just incredible. And at one point, like about 1900, there were at least 25 of these large flour mills that were operating there. And from what I've read, this gold medal mill on the left, it could process 100 train car loads of grain in a day. So we're talking here displacing the country mill with a more commercial scale kind of mill. The turbines under this mill on the right, the Pillsbury mill, were the most powerful turbines ever built. And they are still down there underground now. And of course, the historians and archaeologists would love to go down there, but it is so dangerous with all this water power and those canals and tunnels that are built underground. There's a lot of fear about going down there and trying to do anything with it. But apparently, like a lot of the early industrial sites, it's very ornate, and it would just be beautiful to be able to open that up to tours if they could ever figure out how to cut that water off and be able to, gain access down there. The ultimate site in terms of water for a mill is at a waterfall, because you can see in this image on the left, all you'd have to do is route the water over to the water wheel from there. You would not need to build a dam to provide the water. The only reason you might need a dam would be to provide a storage area for times when there was low water supply, or to be able to be consistent in what you were doing. This lower mill that's actually Sioux Falls, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's the Queen Bee Mine, and that little arch you see down just to the left of the waterfall, that's where the water wheels or turbines would have been at the time this mill was operating. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, before I finish up, how water mills work. And this is actually an opportunity to see under a water mill. Most of them you can't get under, but a few of them you can. And the miller let me go down and take a look under this mill. This is Weston Mill in Vermont. And these are like 15-inch beams, massive beams. I'm actually balanced on one of those with my tripod to be able to get a picture back toward the water wheel, from here. And there's a water turbine here also. The thing about the foundation on a water mill is these structures are subject to a tremendous amount of torque and vibration. So they have to be really substantial to survive that and to survive the floods that they encounter, being located along a stream like this. And for some of the better designed mills, there are actually two foundations. There's one for the structure, the building, and there's a separate foundation where all the machinery is located. So the building itself is a little bit insulated from the vibration that the machinery is producing on its foundation. And when you step in, a lot of times you can see that where you step over, a break in the floor as you're walking through the mill. So this is just a classic water mill, and you see the red water wheel there. This is Smith Grist Mill down at Childersburg, and there's that grassy bank in the background. Well, on the other side of that is the mill pond. And at the left end of that wooden flume structure, you see there's a valve where you turn the water on from the mill pond to flow through that wooden flume and rotate the wheel. Now, the water wheel is typically going to be on the lowest level of the mill. That next level up is where the primary milling machinery would be located. So that's where you're going to find the millstones or the saws or the heaviest duty kind of textile processing equipment, things like that. In a grist mill, that upper level could be used just for storage, but quite often it's used for additional processing, like maybe pre-cleaning the grain before you grind it, or after it's being ground, passing the flour or the meal back to the upper level and sieving it into different qualities like fine flour and middlings and bran and or grits and cornmeal, things like that are typically done on the upper level. And a number of the mills are what you call an automatic mill. So you bring the grain to the mill and then it's transported through a bucket lift or augers or things like that automatically to the upper level without having to be either carried up in sacks or winched up, through a door on the outside. And after it's ground, it's automatically transported back up to be sieved and separated too. And that's called an automatic mill. And Oliver Evans is the one who came up with the original concept for that back in the late 1700s. But that's sort of what the basic, when you look at a mill from the outside, kind of what you're seeing.